New polls coming out tomorrow. The fact is, the ranked teams, there were 24 games today. None of them were against one another. They went 22-2. Nobody in the top 10 lost, even if they all looked kind of shaky for the most part, save for Washington, Penn State, Ohio State crushed Western Kentucky. We'll get to these games in specific later. Let's discuss them a little bit now. But do you see, what are your predictions for major changes in the poll? Do you think Kansas State's going to fall all the way out from 15 to unranked after losing to Mizzou?
Possibly. I mean, somebody will have to fall out generally by the way that the poll works and the law of inertia. So, yeah, I guess Kansas State will fall out. Like, they have to find a way to put Missouri in. Missouri's undefeated and now has a ranked win over Kansas State. Like, that should be the biggest move that's made to me, right? I don't see how you can't, right? Like, do you?
No, I think Mizzou deserves to be ranked after that loss. The one thing I'm wondering, because I do think Tennessee will stay in, because I think that, going from 11 to completely unranked for losing on the road to Florida is probably too big of a drop to expect. Although you never know, with only two teams losing, the voters might get itchy just to move some things around. But I do wonder if there's a chance, because Iowa scored 41 points today and it won. But that's a very misleading 41 points, because I think they threw for 140 yards. And of their touchdown drives, 3 of the 5 were 35 yards or fewer. It was their defense once again giving them short fields. And I think Clemson, after falling out of the poll last week, they were dominant again today against Florida Atlantic. I wouldn't be shocked if Clemson just starts showing up on more polls and they take over for Iowa at the bottom of the rankings.
I can see that. Do you think Bama's going to stay top 10?
See, that's another question too, because I originally thought when Alabama struggled as much as they did against South Florida, it's oh, they're going to drop again. But then it's you look behind them, Tennessee was the team immediately behind them. They lost. Utah was at 12. They played Weber State and won, but it's Weber State. So you're not really going to reward them for that. At 13, LSU was at 14. Maybe LSU climbs to the top 10, although I think that's a little bit much for beating Mississippi State. And then at 13 was Oregon, which completely crushed Hawaii. So maybe Oregon climbs to the top 10. I don't know. But what I'm wondering, of the teams in the top 10, Washington looks like it has a legitimate case not to just be at number 8 and to move up a spot or two. I feel like Washington has a legitimate case to be a top 3 team. They killed Michigan State today. Beat them 41-7. It was 35-0 at halftime. Michael Penix had over 350 yards and 4 touchdowns at the half. The list of names of guys who have done that in the last decade are Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, C.J. Stroud, and Patrick Mahomes. It's a decent list to be on. This is a team that is dog-walking everybody it faces. And I know Michigan State had to deal with all the Mel Tucker stuff this week. But for them to come in and just completely dominate the Spartans in their own stadium, I don't know if you could look at around the rest of the league, especially with how the other teams have looked kind of just blasé. I don't know if there's been a more impressive team in the country so far.
I mean, look, I got to agree with you. I could sit here and say I think these were good matchups for them for the most part, especially Boise, just given what Boise is good and not good at. But man, I don't think Michigan State's DBs are terrible, and they smoked them. And that offense is really, really good. You have to be able to get a pass rush with 4 against those guys, because I don't think that – is there a better trio of receivers in the country?
No.
Because Ohio State kind of reminded everybody today who 1-2 is, I think. But they're so hard to cover. Defensively, they have not faced a single decent passing game yet, I will point out. Tulsa, no. Boise, definitely not. And Michigan State, again, I mean, no passing game at all. So still some questions there, but every test that they've been given so far, they've got 100 on.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can't really say anything else about it, right? That's a test they haven't faced yet.
I mean, real talk, they could have put up 60 tonight if they wanted to. They had the 35 at halftime. The second half, they had 304 yards. They ran 39 plays, but they handed it off 25 times. They were in very serious call off the dogs. Let's just get out of here and go home. They could have put up 60 on Michigan State. I know.
Chat thinks that Michigan State's defensive backs are in fact terrible. So
they're not. I wouldn't call them good. Like that secondary's been bad the last few years, but they play more of a bend but don't break style of defense where it's like they're willing to give up the 10-yard plays if they have to. It's just once they get to the red zone, they try to force you to put the field goals. But Michael Penix is like, yeah, I have these 3 receivers and I have this arm and I could just throw it over you. And that's exactly what he did, which is Michigan State, to be blunt, doesn't really see that very often in the Big Ten unless they're playing Ohio State. But they saw a lot of it today against Washington. And that is just, I don't know, man. It's the Pac-12 is really good. They're going to eat each other alive in the coming weeks. But right now, if you wanted to put Washington in your top 3 on your ballot, I would not argue with you. That's just kind of how I feel about this Husky squad.
Can we rank Clemson?
Yeah.
Who falls out?
Like I said, I would take Iowa out for Clemson. Yeah. I think what happened last week, like the voters are putting in their polls. They saw Clemson was struggling in the first half. And they just kind of like, all right, well, I'm keeping them out because they lost to Duke last week. But Clemson completely took that game over. Duke is now 3-0 after just completely beating the crap out of Northwestern today. So it's like that loss doesn't look nearly as bad as maybe as it looked to them in the hearts of some of the voters early on. And I just think that Clemson, for as bad as the result was against Duke, again, when you look at the box score and all that stuff, like Clemson was not nearly as bad as the score suggests in that game. And they've looked really good and like Clemson the last 2 weeks. And plus they're just Clemson. So when you're putting your ballot together, and you're getting to like that 20-25 range, and you're like, oh, I haven't ranked Clemson yet, and they won by 40. I should probably put them here.
And Duke is good.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just keeps taking care of business. Guys, that's not unfair to Iowa. Iowa is they're not terrible. Like, they could still win the West, but
they're not that good. Like, the 41 points was very misleading. Yeah. I'll look up the stats here because they all count.
Well, the tight end, the leg injury of the tight end, I hope I'm wrong on this, but it looks bad.
Yeah, he was in a boot on the sideline. That was not a good look for him going forward. But just all these points count for Brian Ferentz, so he's not going to give any of them back. But Iowa scored 41 points. Cade McNamara was 9 of 19 for 103 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Nobody on the team had more than 34 yards receiving, and that was Eric All, who caught 1 pass for 34 yards. They ran the ball very well, which is nice because Iowa has kind of struggled to run the ball in recent years, and I think that's played a part in their offense struggling. But overall, like I said, of their 5 touchdown drives, 3 of them were 33 yards or fewer. It's not like the offense was just out there marching up and down the field today. It was Western Michigan. They had short fields. They took advantage.
I think that's fair.